This is a delight to share with you. Real quick, I work for an organization called School of Faith, and we really do three things. We form Catholic school teachers, we form spiritual mentors and directors, and then you have a little card, right? Some of you grabbed the little card. If not, grab it on the way out. These rosary meditations, and we started podcasting, and they quickly became different meditations every day. This isn't your grandma's rosary. This is the way St. Dominic was given the rosary. A little bit of something to pray about, or some aspect of our faith, and then a decade. And anyway, it became one of the top Catholic podcasts in the country, so check it out. A lot of people this past year have told me it's changed their lives. But let's get to this. Possibly the burial cloth of Jesus Christ. The church doesn't claim this to be the burial cloth of Jesus Christ. The church says, let's leave that up to science. And science, well, at least the science I'm going to share with you tonight, and everything I share with you, by the way, is first-class evidence. So in other words, it has been proven. And then I'll share with you things that are kind of second-class evidence, or things that need to be peer-reviewed or researched or checked, or things we have a little trouble trusting or we're not sure we trust. And then just for the heck of it, I'll share with you a little speculation at the very end. But you have to remind me, because I always forget that bit, okay? There are ancient food stains on this, and I want you to remind me at the end. And it's not from one of my 9 kids, which you would think might be the case. And by the way, if you can refrain from touching this, not just because you just ate canes, but even your finger oils alone will actually discolor this over about 5 years or so. And again, these are pretty rare, being 101 in the world, and they don't make them any longer. Well, if you touch it, we'll see your fingerprints. We'll see your, and then I'll be having to explain that in Shroud Talks. People be like, whose hand is that, right? So don't be that person, you know. But when we're done, I do want you to come take a very close look at this. Get some pictures with it if you want, all those things. So, what do you know about the Shroud of Turin? Yeah?
That it is supposed to be very close to Jesus Christ, placed upon him when he was entombed. A study in the 90s that did from daily, that's someone contested, it showed that they claimed it was represented forgery, and that even if it is a forgery, people still have a mystery of how, with the technology they had at the time, would produce a code negative. A spiritual belief is that due to the light that emanated from Jesus Christ.
Woo! Okay, hold on. I'm going to cut you off right there. I'm about to bring you up here. You're about to help me out. Yeah, you're fairly knowledgeable about the Shroud of Turin. That's fantastic. Okay, you want to believe. Well, let's see what we can do with that tonight. I don't want to prove the Shroud to you, but using science, because science has taken off with this, I want to answer 3 questions with you tonight. Number 1, what is this? Number 2, where did it come from, right? And does it have a history? And number 3, could this be the burial cloth of Jesus? And let's get to that. So this showed up in the hands of Geoffroy de Charnay in 1355. He just has this and he throws it on display for the world to see, and nobody knows where he got it from. And the world rushes to it. They're like, that's the burial cloth of Jesus. Please don't tell Father I'm drinking coffee in here, by the way. This is for your sake, not mine. I got 9 kids. I'm tired this time of night. Do you have any focused missionaries in here, though? You are Moses. Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate you. Anybody else? Focused missionary? Hey, good to see you. I appreciate you very much. Thank you for being here. I did 12 years with Focus. This is back when we doubled the amount of focused missionaries. We went from 30 to 60. That's the year I started. And now there's how many?
I think I'm wanting to get around 1,000 hired just this coming year.
That is crazy. Crazy. Well, thank you for being here and being a missionary. So Geoffroy de Charnay throws this thing on display and nobody knows where he got it from. And I always get this question, so I'm just going to share this with you now. People rush to this and they thought that's the blood of our Lord, so they begin to touch it. So I always get the question, can we pull DNA from this? And the answer is, we can probably pull a bunch of DNA from this, and we have no idea whose DNA it is. So that's problematic for us. Science is really coming along, though. Hopefully one day We can pull a DNA from this. Maybe our Lord's right, but for now, we can't. But science keeps looking at this, right? And really it started at the turn of the 20th century when a man named Secundipia was a lawyer by day but a photographer for fun. And he's taken photographs of this. And this is before cameras were in our iPhones, right? We had really amazing cameras. We had something called a shutter. Does anybody know what I'm talking about, right? And that thing would click. It'd leave an image on a dark material, and it would reverse the light and flop the image. And Secundipia is photographing this, and he gets his photographic negatives, and he takes them into his dark room, and he's looking at them, and he realizes he's staring at this face that you're holding right here. If you didn't catch this cheat sheet, there's some at the door. This will be helpful for you tonight. This is a negative of this negative. In other words, the colors have been reversed back, and the image has been flopped back to normal. And the world saw this very human face. And so as science picked up more and more in the 20th century, it started to research this more and more until the carbon dating, which you mentioned. Now, just before that, 10 years prior to that, 1978, there was something called the Shroud of Turin Research Project, the STURP investigation. It was a major scientific investigation of the Shroud of Turin. It's fading a lot today. As a matter of fact, it's nice to see this 1978 photograph because you can see more detail in this today than you could see the actual shroud if you were visiting it in Turin. They're protecting it. They keep it in a triple glass. They pump in certain kinds of gas, protecting it from ultraviolet light. They're trying to protect this image because this image of this man is so lightly toasted on here. As a matter of fact, if you were to put the fibers under the microscope, you'd see little microscopic fibrils sticking up, and the image is just toasted, of the man is just toasted on the top third of the fibrils. If you were to take a razor blade and walk over to his hands and just pass it over his hands without even thinking you're touching the linen, you would erase his hands forever. That's how light this image is. So they're trying to protect it. Except for the blood, which is real blood, which is why it's white on your cheat sheet, because again, the colors are reversed in this negative of the negative. But somehow Secundipia realized we're looking at a photographic negative of this man on a non-photographic material, which shouldn't accept a photograph at all. And so science took off with this more. And what I'm about to share with you, it doesn't sound surprising or crazy to you maybe, but it was to the world then because a lot of people thought it was a hoax, as you were saying. Something somebody threw together in the medieval era somehow. They thought it was painted on. There were all sorts of theories about this, but they decided in 1978 without a doubt that that's a real man buried in that triple finely woven linen cloth. That's real blood. There's a hemoglobin in the blood. There's a particular kind of enzyme, a protein that's present in blood when a man is under extreme stress, a body, in other words, torture. Science will tell us what this man went through the day that he was tortured as well, so we'll walk through that. The blood, by the way, is also very pinkish. I want you to notice that as you're finding blood on here. And what color does blood stains turn over time? Brown, right? And it's very pinkish, yeah. There's two theories about that. Number one, when a body's under extreme stress, it also produces a high amount of a dye in the blood called bilirubin, an orangish, yellowish-like dye, and that could explain why these blood stains are very pink. But also, we think quite possibly this thing was processed down the streets of Constantinople during the early medieval time, on Good Friday, on Holy Saturday, in Holy Week. Cool that we're looking at this here, so close to Holy Week, right? So we think that ultraviolet light may have turned the blood back to kind of a pinkish stain. So they're looking at this at the STURP investigation. They're sure, and by the way, that was a very non-biased investigation of this. There were non-Christian scientists on that panel. They agreed this is certainly a man buried in this. There's no doubt about it. This isn't a hoax. There are very tiny microscopic bits of paint. It was probably fading, and somebody tried to touch it up at some point and then thought that was a really bad idea. I'm not going to do that any longer. So little microscopic bits of paint, but certainly a man. Some of the non-Christian scientists wrote it off, saying, you know what, this is probably just a man, a Christian who in the medieval time was tortured like their Lord and then buried in this cloth. But without a doubt, this is a man who was buried in this cloth, right? There's no man in the cloth now. So what do we do with this? Well, they decided to carbon date it. Makes sense, right? And they set aside a protocol for a carbon dating. They said, and this is, besides the paint, this is the next thing everybody points to, it's the carbon dating. They set aside the protocol, which was supposed to be 7 samples from all over the linen, sent to 7 well-reputed labs across the world, and then you get 7 results. Why is that a good idea? Yeah.
So if you do 7 different spots, it should allow for not a specific spot. For instance, let's say if you get into any of the patchworks on there, and you pull out the sample there and only use that sample that was only dated to one area, and you do 7 different ones, that way you can say, hey, we're not just having one group that may be biased towards it, instead it should be unbiased. Should be.
I have a feeling that you know where this is going.
Yes.
Yeah. If you have 7 samples, right? Thank you. Yeah, if you have 7 samples and one is off, the others check it. This is just good scientific method, right? So in 1988, they get around to carbon dating this, and they take 4 samples, not 7. There was supposed to be a materialist and a thermalist expert on hand to look at those samples to make sure they were part of the original linen. They were on hand, they were on site, but they did not look at the linen. And they sent it off to 4 samples to 3 labs. Phoenix got samples 1 and 4, if I remember correctly. And the results came back 13th, 14th century, which made sense. Geoffrey de Charnay puts this on display around that time, and they think, well, this is some sort of medieval hoax, right? And science stopped looking at this. This is the most researched ancient artifact in the entire world. And science stopped looking at it for 12 years because of that carbon dating. Until a woman named Sue Benson, she's kind of looking down at this patch down here. You mentioned the patch. There's a lot of patchwork on this. This was in a fire in 1532, for instance. And so to see the man in this, you have to start to look past the burn marks. Some poor Clare nuns in 1534 sewed little patches on here. So as you come and get a good look at it later, take a look at their little stitch marks here. It's kind of cool that you can see that. A monk saved this, by the way, or actually was the canon of the church, so almost like a pastor in that time of that church. It was contained and folded in a metal reliquary in the back of the church, a silver reliquary. And of course, when metal gets hot, what does it do? Yes, it starts to melt. So you can see the way in which it was folded. These edges were folded over, and you could tell it singed the edges, but then it was folded up under itself multiple times. And that metal melted and fell through. So it burned through here, but that same bit of metal burned through all of these holes. You see that? All the way down. We think that he had about a cup of water on hand, or maybe he grabbed the holy water on the way in. I have no idea. But he dumped a little water on it, the canon who saved it. And so you'll see a water stain here, consistent. I'm sure it was burning, smoking, but he did save it, right? So you have to start to look past those burn marks. There are patches there, right? So you have to be careful not to take for the carbon dating material from those patches, but there's also patches in the corners. If you notice, my own corners are breaking, right? And this is just from us lifting it, clipping it over and over again. We'll have to get those repaired at some point somehow. But we have ancient photographs. Again, I told you this was probably processed down the streets of Constantinople at the end of Holy Week. And so the corners were gripped, right? Were held really tightly. As a matter of fact, we have a picture early 20th century of some bishops holding this up for people to see, and they're just gripping the corners. And because of that, the corners are damaged. So if you look down in the 2 bottom corners, you see patches down there. You see that? Well, Sue Benson's looking at this, the area where the samples were taken. By the way, it's 4 samples I told you, right? They were one piece taken from right here. They cut off a piece at the edge of this, where this patch goes. How many samples is that? How many samples is that? Trick question. 1 sample, right? They cut it into 4 slices, send it to 3 labs. The results come back 14th century. Sue Benson's looking at this area and she says, you know what? This just doesn't look right to me. And she gets high-resolution photographs from Barry Schwartz, the official photographer of the Stirp investigation 1978, the one from whom I was able to obtain this. He died earlier this year. Say a prayer for him. Wonderful man. And she takes high-resolution photos down to textile experts. She doesn't tell them what she's looking at, and she says, tell me what you see. And they say, clearly, this here actually is not part of this material. We can tell, just from the naked eye, they're experts in their field, that this is another material. They must have used something like French invisible weave to weave it into the material. So Sue Benson posts her results, and she gets some pushback from some scientists, one in particular named Ray Rogers, who says, take down your research right away. The carbon dating is what it is. This has been disproven. This is from the 13th century or so. And actually, Barry Schwartz, the photographer, sticks up for her and says, Ray, why don't you look at your own samples and do the research yourself? Now, in the year 2000, the Vatican hired somebody to restore this. And when they did, this is a company that restores paintings. And you can just imagine paintings in old churches, right, in Europe getting really dusty. What do you think they do with them? They vacuum them. And this was vacuumed. Literally sucked all of the evidence right out of it, right? We have it, but it's in a ball. But as we're going through tonight, it'll make sense to you that where evidence is on this matters. It tells us something about what happened to this man the day that he suffered. Anyway, when they were restoring it, however, they removed the patches. And what's kind of interesting about that is they were able to peek into this patch where the strip was cut, and they noticed it was bright white inside. And it shouldn't be bright white inside of this linen. But also Ray Rogers, and he was dying of cancer. So he really wanted to know, is this possibly the burial cloth of Jesus? Could the carbon dating have been false? And so he's racing cancer to do the research himself. 3M, thankfully, had produced a sticky tape. You familiar with 3M, the tape company? A sticky tape that would not leave a residue on this linen. And so every scientist in the Stirp investigation, Ray Rogers included, had sticky tape samples from every square centimeter of the entire thing. So that's what we're still able to use for research today. And he looks at his own sticky tape samples from this region right here and discovers two things he should not have found. One, a cotton. There's no cotton in this triple finely woven linen. And number two, a gum dye wardent. You can imagine that's kind of a sticky material, either used to help adhere the weave, the French invisible weave or whatever method is used here, to help those patches adhere, knowing they're often gripped onto and held onto, right? And they have to hold the weight of the material. Or to dye this material to look like this material. And he produced his own results, and the carbon dating has been far disproven. As a matter of fact, they didn't dare share this, but as you go across the strands of the one sample, right? Literally, the date changes as you move inward on the linen, several hundred years. The date drops as you go in. There are other methods. You can stretch linen, you can crush it compared to 3,000-year-old Egyptian linens. There's some methods today that, there's one method in particular they say is more reliable than carbon dating. They're arguing that right now. Anyway, you take the summation and the average of the dates across the 7 most reliable methods. What date do you think you get? You know where I'm going with this.
First century.
33, first century, you're right in the window. 50 AD, give or take 200 years, 98% certainty that it's somewhere in that window. So science starts to pick up on this again, right? And they begin to research again, and now we have industrial scientists jumping in on this, and forensics, and as science grows, so does our research on this. As a matter of fact, I was trying to think about what I might know now than what I knew, what researchers told us just from 2 years ago when I was with you last. And there's some substantial things, so I'm excited to share that with you. Have you all found the image of the man at this point? Okay, all right. He can be a little tough to find, right? Sometimes this helps right here. You see this face right here? Okay. So he's lying on his backside here. So this is the back of his head, his shoulders, his legs on down to his feet. This side is folded up over top of the man. And so it catches the facial image right here. So you see that right here. This is a water stain. So don't make the mistake of thinking this is the top of the back of his head, right? This is the top of his head here. This is a water stain. The back of his head's here. His face, his chest, and on down. And now that you know that, we tend to reverence 5 wounds, right, of Jesus. 5 wounds. What wounds do you see? The forehead? Yeah. You see the blood around the forehead, and again, that's white here, right? Because the colors have been reversed on your negative, essentially a photograph. Yeah, he has 30 to 50 wounds, we estimate. Not just here, but across over top the entire top of his head. he's not just wearing a circular crown of thorns, he's wearing a cap of thorns. And then the blood, and it struck a arterial vein here, and then the blood is pooled in the back of his hair here, because every time his head goes back on the cross, those thorns pierce his neck. And we're pretty certain that these are what we call the Jesus thorns, because of Jesus, right? They can be 3 to 5 inches long. When they harden, they are as hard as nails. And for this man, they've pierced all the way to the skull bone. Now, I often get asked, what about the circular crown we have at Notre Dame? And this could be the same crown that is in Notre Dame now. Think about this for a sec, right? These thorns are really long and they hurt. A Roman soldier is not going to waste his time fashioning, right, a whole crown for a criminal, right? And somebody they're trying to embarrass, right? And so, and they're in the business of mocking him at that time too. So there's no way that he's going to jab himself and waste his time doing that. Instead, it's much more likely he's going to hack off a bunch of these thorns carefully, right? And then he's going to take some browner branches and form a circular crown, place the thorn on top, and use the circular piece to push the thorns down and hold them. And that circular piece made of browner branches is more likely what we have at Notre Dame, if this man wore the same crown we have at Notre Dame. And the greener branches would probably have decomposed over time. What other wounds are you seeing? Yeah, the hands. Okay, you see the hands? Is that wound in the hand or the wrist? Anybody think it's in the hand? It's tough. Some of you are looking at it. Yeah, it's not far from here, right? So it's, you see it right here? It's not far from the bottom of his fingers. Does that make sense? So it almost makes it look like it's in the hand, but you're right. It's in the wrist right here. The reason it looks so close to the bottom of his fingers, the reason his fingers look so long, it looks like he should play the piano, right? Look at his face for just a moment. Pop quiz. Do you see a beard or lips or teeth? Let's take a vote. Who sees a beard? You do see a beard. Now there is a strap there too, so it's pushing the beard down under his chin a little bit, but you are seeing a beard. Who sees lips? You are seeing lips. Who sees teeth? Yeah, you're seeing teeth. If you look along his lips, you'll see little stars. This is a dental x-ray. This is somehow not just a photographic negative on a non-photographic material, but it's also an x-ray of this man. The reason his fingers look so long is you're seeing the finger bones all the way up into the hand. Make sense? Now, why would they go through the wrist and not the hand? Yeah?
If you're going to crucify something, you don't want them falling off immediately. So instead of going towards bones that can be easily broken off,
Okay.
maybe in your hands, you go for the one that would be, well, very sturdy and very hard to break off.
Okay.
In your wrist.
Thank you. Yeah, this is just fleshy tissue. I'm sorry, I know you just ate. They've done an experiment on cadavers, and this won't hold half the weight of a body on the cross for even 10 minutes. It just gets mushy. You have bones down here, as you mentioned. So they would go through the cluster of bones that's right here. But also, you have several nerves that run through here. The ulnar and the median. As a matter of fact, when these nerves were exposed in the world wars, paramedics realized they need to get soldiers, those soldiers, right, explosion or shrapnel or whatever it might be, they had to get them morphine within 10 minutes. Otherwise, the pain was so severe, they became suicidal. That's the kind of pain we're talking about. The Romans were trying to perfect Greek forms of torture. So they had a recipe for crucifixion. They wanted the arms to be at a 15-degree angle, and then they would drive that nail right through that cluster of bones and through those nerves right there, so that the person would have to lift themselves for every breath. And as they did, it would send a burning sensation and shooting pains through the entire top of the body. It might feel similar to being on fire or being struck by lightning, something like that, just to take a breath. As a matter of fact, if you look right here, you see how the blood flow out of the hands is in a V form, separated by about 15 degrees. It's because of the two blood flows. As the man is down, there is one blood flow. As he lifts himself up, there's a second blood flow. You can almost trace his breaths across the two blood flows here. As you're looking at his hands, what's kind of interesting about this, I don't know if we knew this last time. This is newer research. There's actually 2 nail marks in this hand. As a matter of fact, what finger can you not see? The thumb. They weren't in the business of cutting off fingers, thankfully. But hold your hand out here. You can jab your buddy in front of you a little bit, keep him awake, right? Does your thumb swing free like it's on a hinge, or does it kind of sit in place? Yeah. I'm an old man, so mine like cracks and makes weird noises, but you have a muscle and a tendon that holds that thumb in place. Now for this man, he has 2 piercings, and one accidentally, we think this is by accident, pierced the muscle, and one pierced the tendon. The thought here is that this man was so tall, he's 5'10", it's hard to tell because his body's been on the cross 30 to 45 minutes, expired, before he's brought down from the cross. So his body's begin to stiffen in rigor mortis. So his head is actually up and his knees are bent. So he doesn't look 5'10", but he's very close to 5'10", 5'9", very close to it. And, oh man. Sorry, sometimes this gets to me, what our Lord went through for us, right? And we'll talk about that in just a moment. It's thought with this man, the best theory here, is that because he's so tall, they went to nail him through the pre-drilled holes in the cross. They nailed him up. They didn't get the 15-degree angle right because his arms were so long. Whether it's 1st century or 14th century, he's tall, right? Not unheard of tall, but he's tall. And because of the length of his arms, they had to unnail him, slightly stretch, and re-nail right here to get the 15-degree angle right, to get their recipe right for crucifying this man. One severed the tendon, one severed the muscles, and the thumb stiffened up underneath the hands in rigor mortis. What other wounds? You're doing pretty good. We got the hands. We got the crown. All right, we got 3 more to go, though. We got a ways to go. Yeah.
The back, scourge in the back.
The back, okay. You see the scourge marks across his back? Where else do you see them? What's that? They're on the legs. Yep. Where else? What's that? They're on his arms. Very good. Anywhere else? Yep. Yep. This man, there's 4 kinds of Roman phlegrums on display in Rome from the 1st century. 3 of them, and again, I told you the Romans were trying to perfect Greek forms of torture. The Greeks had very long straps. They thought, the longer the faster, right? Anybody play baseball? What happens when you get a bat that's too long? What's that? Yeah, yes. It slows your bat speed, right? Yeah, and the Romans realized that the straps were just too long. It was actually slowing them down, so they shortened their straps. So each of these phlegrums, these whips, have 3 straps on them, and at the end of each of the straps are tied things like, and this is not what this man was scourged with, but things like porcelain, animal bone, rock, things that would cut into you. When men were scourged, they were scourged to death. It is very rare that somebody would be scourged and then crucified. Now there's a 4th kind of Roman phlegrum on display in Rome, let alone, wear a crown of thorns, right? This is all unique to Jesus. But there's a 4th kind of Roman phlegrum. It too has 3 straps, similar construction, but at the end of the 3 straps, there's 2 metal beads. So if you look, even from where you're sitting, but you can kind of see it on your cheat sheet too, you can see bead marks right here, and then a line and another bead mark. You see that over and over again? A bead mark, a line, and another bead mark. Now that sounds like a nicer form of scourging than the porcelain, right, which might cut into you, the glass, but it's not. It allowed them to scourge you for longer. There were 2 men who scourged this man. It wasn't chaotic, it was very systematic. And they stood on each side of him. We can tell that one man was about 2 inches taller than the other based upon the arc. And what they would do is they would work through the layers of skin to the point, the equivalent of 3rd-degree burns. So you see the patterns over and over again here. Then they would switch positions and they would begin again. So you see the patterns once more. There across his buttocks, there's nothing protecting him here. Same on the front side. In other words, this man was scourged in the nude. This is to embarrass him. This is to deter others from being like him as well. And then all down the legs, like you said, all the way down to the feet. He was struck. He has 240 wounds on his front side, if this is 3 wounds. 240 wounds. Then they flip him over and they begin again, clavicles to ankles, and work their way down the entire body. As you said, you saw him on the chest, the arms, again here in his midsection, on down the legs. Imagine being hit in the shins. He has 120 wounds on his front side. This man was struck 120 times, and we can tell that when he left the scourging, his body was in shock because of the brutality of it and the blood loss. As a matter of fact, we are pretty certain that this man, when he died in crucifixion, he didn't die of asphyxiation, not able to get his breath any longer. He actually died of a broken heart. His heart gave out. His heart was failing already on the way to crucifixion. We're missing a few wounds. What are we missing, friends? What's that? The feet. You can see a little blood coming from the top of the feet here, but otherwise you can't see much. You can see that. Down here, I'm sorry, you'll have a little trouble seeing it, but down here you'll see a full impression of a foot. It's able to leave that because, again, his legs are bent, right? So his legs are bent upward. There's a full impression of a foot here, and then this foot is folded up over top, so you only see the heel here. Can you tell where that, I know there's a lot of blood down here, but can you tell where the blood's coming from? Good guess, down the legs. Here he's lying down. Yeah, from the heel, from the ankles, yeah. Again, they would go through the heels for the same 2 reasons that they went through the wrist. One, that's a bone down there, right? Archaeology has dug up heel bones from first century crucifixions, and the nail is still through them. 2, you have a cluster of nerves right there, and they made sure that the knees were at a particular angle so the person would have to lift themselves for every breath. And as they did, it would feel like your bottom half was on fire and send shooting pains up as far as the lower waist, if you can imagine. We're missing 1 wound. Yeah.
Was that the watermark you said on his chest? Or?
Yes, there's a watermark here in his chest. Yes, right here.
So that would be his spear.
No, but you're so close to it. You're literally like right there. Do you see it? Anybody see the wound in the side? Do you see it? Did you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to ask, can we see the shoulder wound?
What? The shoulder wound. All right, give me a minute. We'll come back to that. Good question. Yes. You can't. You can't, but we can see it, yeah. I'll explain that in a sec. Thanks. Yeah. You see the wound on the side? You see it? Yeah. Right here. You see that right there? There's a patch right here, but there's a wound right here. There's blood coming forth from it. This is not just a photograph on a non-photographic material that's somehow also an X-ray of this man. This is also a 3-dimensional photograph, which is crazy. If I were to take a picture of you, right, with a camera that's 3-dimensional, I wouldn't have all of your 3-dimensional information. But you can look it up online. We have all of this man's 3-dimensional information, anatomically correct to be a person, digitally proven. And they have been able to develop statues of this man. So you can see exactly what his body looks like now. If you look these up, I just want to warn you, it's not going to be like you'd imagine Jesus standing right in front of you. And it's because of what his body's been through, right? There's an incredible amount of swelling and some other things going on here. Some things we'll talk about with his face here in just a moment. But I bring that up because it's an X-ray and a 3-dimensional image. When we digitally enhance this wound, we can actually see into the wound a little bit and examine the wound. And when we do, we've compared it to a Roman pilum, a spear, and that is a match. It's not to say that another instrument could not have created that wound, but the pilum is a match. Now, what's really interesting about this is we can also see, because we can examine that wound, we can see the trajectory of the wound, and at the angle that it cuts, it goes right between the 5th and the 6th rib, straight to the heart. And we know that Roman soldiers, some of them were highly trained, right arm, shield arm, left hand, spear hand, to take a kill shot in battle if it was available to them. highly trained to strike right between the 5th and the 6th rib, straight to the heart. As a matter of fact, there's a statue that predates Christ by a couple hundred years, and it's a soldier, and he's down, and he's dropped his gear, and we tend to believe that he's contemplating his death. He knows it's coming because he's bleeding from that spot. He knows he's been hit with that kill shot. So these soldiers were highly trained to take that. That's exactly what this man was struck with. And using certain kinds of light, which will bring us back to the shoulder in just a sec, we can see there's a clear fluid around this blood wound. What did they see coming forth from the side of Christ? Water and blood, which represents what for us? Baptism and Eucharist, right? And Eucharist, yeah. You asked about the shoulder. Padre Pio, who had the wounds of Christ, right? He shared with John Paul II privately once that he had a wound that hurt more than any other, and it was the shoulder wound. Not to say that that would have hurt Christ more than the other wounds, but that's the one that bothered him the most. He miraculously carried the wounds of Jesus on his body. And this man, under certain kinds of light, we can tell actually that his shoulder, his right shoulder, is all cut up. And those cuts progress diagonally along his back. Now, look at his hands for me really quick. It's hard, right? Especially this time of night. This is the time of night you study, though. This time of night, I'm trying to get my kids to bed, and I'm brain dead, which is why I'm sucking on coffee. But, so you'll get this, right? Remember that up here, what looks like the right arm is the left arm, which looks like the left is the right, because it's lying on him, right? And there it's flipped back to what looks like right is right, what looks like left is left. Okay. So up here, which arm looks longer? The right arm. Yeah, very good. And what might explain that? Dislocation. Now, we have not been able to prove dislocation, but we still think it's highly possible. And several people have tried, and we just can't prove it yet. But somewhat likely that it's dislocated. Absolutely. But look at his face again, just for a moment. Oh, and by the way, while you're looking at the face here, his face, this man has been punched in the face. His nose is broken. The septum is split. And we can tell that his beard has been ripped at. And I find this, heart-wrenching, but also I just find this fascinating. And here's why. All these things that the Gospels share about what happened to Christ, they all are saying, hey, you remember when that prophet said, you remember when that psalm said, because the prophets in the Psalms 750 to 1,000 years before Jesus said things like, they will pierce my hands and my feet. They will scourge me. They will mock me. They will beat me. They will spit upon me. It foretells all of these details. And so when the gospel writers are telling us that this is what happened to Jesus, they're saying Jesus fulfilled what the prophets said. But there's one detail that is not in the Gospels, that's in the Old Testament, and I just find this fascinating. One of my degrees is in sacred scripture. And that's that they will pluck at my beard or rip at my beard. And that's nowhere in the Gospels. But this man's beard has been ripped at. While you're looking at his face, now remember, right is right and left is left on here, right? Looks like. Which side of the face leaves less of an impression on the linen? The right side, yeah. We can also tell that this man's hands show sign of claw hand. Here's where I'm going with this. When they set about to try to figure out if the shoulder was dislocated, they realized that actually what they're seeing is paralysis. If you are hit with a blunt force strike right here, you have a nerve that runs through here, it'll cause a paralysis on the upper right-hand side of your body, and that's why this man is drooping. As a matter of fact, we can tell that his right eyeball is slightly drooping in the orbital bone. He's experiencing paralysis. I was at a high school wrestling meet. One of my sons wrestles, and one of the guys on the team, he was returned to the mat in an unsafe way, and it hit him right here, and he could not move parts of his body for about 45 minutes. It was really scary. We were praying for him a bit, and I was standing with some of the coaches, and they were like, I know what happened to this man. He was dropped, right, in such a way that this part of the shoulder was hit, and he's experiencing this paralysis. And I was like, I know what you mean. That's likely what happened to the man in the shroud, actually. It was a kind of an interesting conversation while we were worried and praying for this guy. He's okay, thankfully. He's all right. It ended up being partially concussion-related, and he was able to recover. My point is, what would have the weight to cause that kind of blunt force strike, do you think? Yeah.
It would be the cross, because, not everybody just has a spare cross lying around for an unintended execution.
Yeah. The crossbeam alone, if that's all he's carrying, is upwards of 100 pounds. Now, there's a high amount of dirt on his feet. You'll see where I'm going with this in just a second. This is where evidence matters. It's a shame they vacuumed it. But there's a high amount of dirt on his feet, and that makes sense, right? What's interesting about the dirt is that it's a particular travertine aragonite. We might find a similar dirt somewhere else in the world, but to this point, we've only found it in one place. Just take a guess where. Yeah, on the temple steps of Jerusalem, obviously tracked in from the surrounding area. And then there is a high amount of dirt on his left knee. Not his right knee, but his left knee. What does that suggest? He goes down. And then there's a high amount of dirt around his nose. What does that suggest? A full face plant, yeah. So if that crossbeam strikes him in the shoulder and he's carrying something really heavy, like they carried railroad ties as they're building the American railroad, you'd have a third of the weight here, about a third, a little more across the back, and then a little less than a third hanging off here, which is exactly where he has all of those cuts. And then he goes down and that strikes him. It would cause a paralysis and render him unable to carry the cross any longer. And what do we know about Christ's story? His passion. Simon of Cyrene. Under a Roman edict in which a Roman soldier could force anybody in their conquered kingdom to carry their equipment up to a mile. You remember when Jesus says, hey, when somebody asks you to carry their stuff a mile, what should you do? Yeah, go the extra mile, we like to say, right? It's because of that Roman edict. Can you imagine if your region was conquered, right? And some soldier who patrols your area, right? And you want your land back. You want your freedom back in a sense. You want to rule your own land. And he asks you to carry his stuff a mile. How are you going to feel about that? Yeah. About like my kids when I ask them to empty the dishwasher, right? That's probably the look that they'd be given, right? So can you imagine Jesus? And he's out in the hill country where, by the way, there's probably some zealots, right? Some people who, some people who might even war a bit with some of these Roman soldiers. They want their land back. Can you imagine Jesus being like, hey, stop warring with them? And actually says it in other instances, similar things, right? Peter, put your sword away. He who lives by the sword dies by the sword. You keep warring with them, they're going to destroy you, which they did in 70 AD. And he foretells the fall of the temple, right? Within a generation, exactly. They're going to destroy you. Instead, you want to win Rome over, love them. Can you imagine, right, if somebody's like, they carry your stuff a mile, and then they're like, hey, some Christian, some Jew, something like, hey, this stuff looks heavy. Why don't I just carry it one more mile down the road for you? Can you imagine the awe and the wonder that that person might have, right? Why is this Christian or this Jew carrying my stuff an extra mile? But the Lord's trying to teach us how to suffer and sacrifice in such a way, because that is love, right? In such a way that we win others. And I want to pause real quick right here. John, how are we doing on time? Okay, all right. I'm about out of coffee, but I know he's got some monsters hidden around here somewhere. So if we get desperate, we'll be good. We'll be good. We'll re-energize. We'll refuel. I just want to ask why for a moment. The church doesn't say this is the burial cloth of Jesus. She says leave it up to science. And that's what we're doing. We're walking through the science. And we'll shift gears here in just a moment and ask, could this be Jesus's, right? Is there any science to suggest that? So we'll go there in a moment. And we'll start to wrap it up. But before that, I just want to pause for a moment because the church says we can highly reverence this because it accurately portrays what our Lord went through for us. So I want to pause here at the moment of the crucifixion, right? While we have this in our minds and our hearts. Some saints have asked the questions. Matter of fact, Benedict, Pope Benedict, if you're familiar with him, when he was Ratzinger and doing some of the background research in the catechism we have today, they were asking this question. This is a question we might all ask at some point. Why all of this? If he's God and he's omnipotent and he's all powerful, he could save us with a drop of blood. He could no doubt find another way to save us. So why incarnate, which is what we celebrate today? Be in a womb for 9 months, born into poverty, hidden in family life, right? Hidden away for 30 years. Family and friends, just living that life, right? Shows us how important our family and our friends are, our friendships, right? And then go through all of this. And he allowed it to happen to himself, right? He chose it and allowed it to happen to himself. Eventually, Benedict came to an answer that I think is just profound. And basically it's this, that God is the perfection of love. So he adores you. And this is very personal. It's not, hey, if I gave my life, maybe I could save millions. This wasn't some mathematical calculation. No, this is extremely personal. This is between you and him. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus tells Peter, my soul is very sorrowful, even unto death. He's quoting from Sirach 39, like a good Jewish rabbi would quote just a line or a word from the Scriptures. And because the Jews know the Scriptures like the back of their hand, they know what their rabbi is talking about. My soul is very sorrowful, even unto death. What is Jesus sorrowful about? He's facing off with all of evil in a way we can't understand, being God. He's carrying the weight of all of our sin in a way we can't understand. But the quote from Sirach says, isn't it a sorrow unto death when a friend is a friend only in name, but turns to enmity? Who is the friend who's about to walk into the garden and betray Jesus with a sign of peace? Judas. Which, by the way, that kiss, sort of speculation. Luke, the doctor, tells us he sweat like grape drops of blood in that garden. My grandpa had that medical condition in his back. And when that happens, all of your skin across your entire body becomes extremely sensitive. That kiss would have felt like a needle piercing him. And then that effect would have remained. Imagine going through this when your skin feels like that, right? But my point is, imagine Jesus being that sorrowful over Judas. And that's how personal this is. So when I say you, I mean you, and I mean you personally. It wasn't enough for perfect love to be scourged for you. It wasn't enough for perfect love to be mocked or beaten or spit upon for you. Is this making sense? Perfect love would want to do more for you. And I mean you. The saints, right, and it said if you were the only one who needed this, Jesus would have done it just for you. In some sort of mystical sense, this is for you. And it's not even enough for perfect love to carry his cross for you, even to be crucified. He gives his life, right? And that's the most that a friend can do, right? The Scriptures say, to give their life for another. That's how much the Lord loves you. But he's the Lord. And this is the answer Benedict came to. And I think it's just profound and beautiful. Perfect love took on a human body, which we celebrate today, and burst the bounds of that human body and continued to pour out his life and his love through the sacramental life of the church. In the Eucharist, in your baptism, which didn't just happen once, it's that grace is still affecting you now. And he just continues to embrace you in his life and his love and love you. That's how much the Lord loves you. That's incredible. All right. Could this be Jesus's? I'm going to mix in with scientific evidence, just a little bit of artistic evidence. Okay? First of all, there's a high amount of pollen on this. And if you have allergies, I'm sorry, it's that time of year, and this mentally might set you off, right? But we are surrounded by pollen fossils that are thousands of years old. Can you imagine? And there was a gentleman named Max Frey. He was the world's leading pollen expert. He was at the STRP investigation. He's since deceased. So if you still don't know what you're doing, what your major is, or what you want to do with your life, you could become the next world's expert in pollen fossils. You should go for it. And then you should research this thing, and you could back up Max Frey's research. And it is second-class evidence. He was an expert. He wasn't sloppy in his research. It just has not been peer-reviewed. So don't hang your hat on this yet, but he was the world's leading expert. And he had his own sticky tape samples, and he examined them, and guess where the highest amount of pollen fossils comes from in the world? Who invited this guy? You're Jerusalem or northern Judea, but mine would probably be Ohio, yeah? So you're right about that. You are right. And then we have something interesting kind of happens. We have a 4th century mention in Athanasius' homily, so obviously reflecting a tradition of the time that one of the apostles carries this up north, and I think it was 68 AD, carries the burial cloth of Jesus up north to Turkey. And then something is on display in Turkey for 500 years called the Mandylion that people believed was the face of Jesus. And we believe that Mandylion transformed art over all of those centuries. On and off it was on display, and artists showed up to paint their depictions of Jesus based upon it. And people started to realize that this face that you're holding looks a lot like that art. As a matter of fact, that art transformed from a very Roman depiction to a more Semitic one like you're looking at. Longer hair, more darkly complex, longer nose, some of those kinds of features. One in particular sits in St. Catherine's in Egypt today, Christ Pantocrator. It's a beautiful icon. It's something you can look up. And what's crazy is the face looks a lot like that. So much so, they decided it was worth just doing a little, facial matching, forensic facial matching. And you need 50 points of congruence for a forensic facial match. Guess how many they got? Keep going, higher. What's that? Keep going. 150-ish. 3 times over a facial forensic match. Friends, the face in that icon could have unlocked this guy's iPhone. That's saying something, right? Okay. Guess where the next largest conglomeration of pollen fossils is from? Turkey, where the Mandylion was on display. We now wonder if this was the Mandylion. But Turkey is under Muslim siege, and so historically we know Romanus puts together a military, and they go south, and we actually believe he did this to rescue the burial cloth of Jesus, that he believed it to be in Turkey and was going to rescue it. That was one of the primary reasons he does this. And he would have brought it back to Constantinople. Guess where how the next largest conglomeration of pollen fossils is from on this? According to Max Frey. Constantinople. You see where I'm going with this. And as a matter of fact, we think we have more artistic evidence from Constantinople in that time period pointing to this. I'll give you just a few hints. There's a coin, for instance, that looks a lot like this face, and there's some details on it that seem like they must be inspired from this face. But even more so, there's something called the Prey Codex from 1192. So this is late 12th century. It's almost like a comic book depiction of Jesus' resurrection. It's not, right? It's for reverencing. But in one, he's lying on his linens, and on the next scene, he's coming up out of it. But what's crazy about this is that there are details on that are only on here. To start with, the artist made it a point to draw a triple herringbone weave across the entire linen, the entire burial cloth in his depiction. This is a finely woven triple herringbone weave. So that's weird. But then it just gets weirder. It looks like this man. His arms are in exactly this fashion. He's naked and covering himself in this way. His fingers are elongated, just like you're seeing. And then, nail in the coffin for me, no pun intended, the artist includes these. These are called poker marks. These are more ancient than the 1532 fire of Chambray. These have things like incense around them, and they suggest, you see how they're even on all sides, right? And he puts them in those exact spots on there. This suggests that this was somehow used as an altar cloth in some sort of liturgy. Imagine it being used as an altar cloth in Mass or something like that. In other words, the 1192 Pray Codex must have been based upon this. There's almost no way to see around that. But I think here's here's two things that really make all these connections for us. First of all, in John's Gospel, the linen's described as lying flat when John looks into the tomb. And he doesn't see Jesus. He's not expecting to see Jesus. Some of the women had come and said to him, hey, they stole Jesus' body, right? So he's not expecting to see a body, but he sees the linens and the face cloth folded up by itself. Now, it took an expert both in the Greek language and Jewish burial custom to retranslate that. This is just a theory, okay? There's other theories like, oh, well, they camped with Jesus, they were homeless with him for years, and they knew he made his bed every morning, right? So maybe he made his bed, and that's a theory, right? Maybe. There's other theories that he folds the face cloth. You know when you're at a formal dinner and you get up to leave and use the restroom, you put your napkin on the seat and it lets the waiter know you're returning, you're not done, right? There's some kind of folding that they would do, and so some suggest, well, maybe he folded his face cloth in that way to say, hey, I'll be right back, right? But this expert, and those are great theories, there's this expert in both Jewish burial custom and in the Greek language has looked at this and said, actually, this could be translated differently, and he suggests it should be, for what that's worth, that John looks in there and he sees the linens lying flat, but the face cloth still standing. Now, that wouldn't be miraculous. That would be just dried sweat and blood. We believe we have the face cloth of Jesus. It's called the Sudarium of Oviedo. We have a rich history, especially back to the 6th, 7th century. We are pretty sure this is the face cloth of Jesus. It would be tied on at the place of crucifixion. To protect the dignity of the person, it would catch many of the fluids as the person's body is transported to the tomb. It would have been tied up very tight underneath. By the way, even though there's a lot of fluid on that, right, from blood wounds, but also gases, and fluids, things that would come forth from the nose and the mouth of a deceased person, we can tell the origins of all of those wounds and those places where those gases would come from. And we have compared that to this face and these wounds using digital overlay technique, and it was a perfect match. There's no way to see around it. The Sudarium of Oviedo has touched the same face that this cloth has touched. Okay, so John peers in and he sees it, and it's still tied, right? In other words, he looks in and he says, I saw and I believed. And this expert in both Greek language and Jewish burial custom says what he sees is the face cloth still standing, not miraculous, just those dried fluids. But he says not folded, but tied. It's still tied. If it's still tied, and he uses in the Greek language, it's that technical term for the burial custom of tying that knot real tight. If it's still tied, how does Jesus get out of it? Nobody stole the body. There's also a strap around his knees, a strap around right here, a light strap just to keep it from blowing off of him, especially because the knees are bent. Yeah. Okay, I want you to hold that thought for a moment because we're going to come right back to it in a sec. If it's still tied, the only way for him to get out of that is to pass through it. Does that make sense? Okay, hold that thought for a sec. Real quick, how does Geoffrey de Charnay get a hold of this? Well, we think it's sitting in Constantinople. We think it's processed around. As a matter of fact, if you ever go to, they have Byzantine liturgy here, don't they? I can't remember if it's Good Friday or Holy Saturday, but they'll have a special liturgy. Their liturgies come from the East. They're all developed they get their liturgies from Constantinople. We think that liturgy, they have a liturgy on that day where they throw a cloth, the priest throws a cloth over his shoulders. It has an image of Jesus on it, and he processes around. It's a burial cloth, right? And they get that from Constantinople, and we think that maybe this was processed around Constantinople when it arrived. We have several mentions in soldiers' diaries, for instance, that the burial cloth of Jesus, I saw it unraveled before me in Constantinople, along with the art. So we're pretty sure this is in Constantinople. Just to connect the dots to Geoffrey de Charnay, or is it too late for that? You're like, I didn't want a history lesson tonight, Dave. You want to connect the dot real quick? I mean, we're so close. Why would we not go the distance, right? Well, This somehow, Constantinople ends up in Muslim siege. This is the beginning of the Fourth Crusades. The Byzantine emperor needs help. He calls on Pius III, the Pope, and says, hey, help us. He sends down a military. There's some different versions of this, whether it's from the east or the west. But anyway, Constantinople is saved. It seems like the soldiers are sitting around waiting for payment, and payment never comes, and they decide to sack the city, pay themselves. Bad idea, probably, right? But anyway, they also took all the religious relics, including the burial cloth of Jesus. It's specifically mentioned. You can imagine the Byzantine Empire is really upset about this. The Byzantine Emperor's own nephew sends a letter to the Pope saying, here's what they did. They took all these things, and specifically he mentions they took the burial cloth of Jesus, and we know where they took it. They took it straight to Athens. There was a man named La Roche who was sort of a hero in the Fourth Crusades, and he gets back to Athens, and he's named Duke of Athens. And the Pope sends Athens a letter saying, hey, I know what you did, basically. I know what you took. Now, La Roche had already been in trouble with the Pope, and you get in enough trouble for stuff like this, you're excommunicated. So he probably didn't want to be in any more trouble. So if he has the burial cloth of Jesus, it would make sense that he would hide it. Geoffrey de Charnay marries the great-great-granddaughter of guess who? La Roche. His family, he never said where he got it from. He just puts it on display for the world to see in 1355. I believe it was later that year he died in battle. He was an incredibly virtuous man. His family was asked where he got it, and all they would ever say is, it was a gift freely given. So we think now that maybe it was handed on in the family, and then when he married into the family, it was a gift given to him in marriage. And being the virtuous man that he was like, I cannot keep this to myself. So he puts it on display for the world to see. You want to know the good news about this? There's no freaking body in here, right? I mean, that's what makes this so cool, right? There's no body. And there's a timestamp on it that tells us how long the body was on here, was in this cloth. There are certain gases that we know would come forth from the nose and the mouth, and we can timestamp that. It never hits 40 hours. Never hits 40 hours. These blood wounds that you see here, of course, the blood would have dried a bit on the cross, right? But what happens if you get a scab and, on your shoulder and you throw on a shirt? What happens to the scab? It softens up and it bleeds again. We call that fibrinolysis. We can actually trace that process across short periods of hours. And so this blood would have softened and then soaked into the linen. By the way, there's no... we're going to figure out in a moment how this image ends up on here. There's no image underneath the blood. What does that mean? What was on here first? The blood or the image? The blood. And then the blood protects the linen from the image. Yeah. So this blood starts to soak in. And we can trace that right up to 30 to 36 hours. And then we know these wounds, this body, is not touching this linen any longer. They have to bury Jesus right before nightfall because that's the start of the new day and the Sabbath, and they can't do work. So they're rushing to bury him before nightfall. Nightfall on Good Friday. Do the math because it's too late for me. You do the math for me. Plus you're smarter than I am. Where does 30 to 36 hours put us? Yeah. Midnight to 6 a.m. Easter morning, there's no longer a body in this linen, right? How does this image end up on here? But I do want to hold that in our hearts just for a moment. The Lord, we celebrate the incarnation today, right? And the Lord takes on the full breadth of a human life, partly to show us that He's, He does this to show us how much He loves us, but He takes on the full breadth of a human life to show us that He's with us in no matter what it is we're going through. He was willing to live every bit of it and suffer every bit of it. So no matter what you're going through, He's with you in it, and there will be some sort of a resurrection in it. And life can really throw punches sometimes. They can really throw them hard sometimes. But just know the Lord is with you. And just lean on Him. Lean on that grace and turn to Him in prayer in those moments and let Him make your burdens lighter. Don't try to bear the future. Just live the moment. And He'll get you there. He'll get you through it to the resurrection. How does this end up on here? Well, first of all, how did he get out of it? He must have passed through it. We have 44 crazy boxes of evidence that need to be checked to describe how it is this man leaves this image on here. Okay? 44 boxes. All the theories that have been suggested barely check a box, right? That's where we're at. Until you put two theories together. One of them is the fall-through theory. It falls through him and or he passes through it. And it partly explains how he leaves a three-dimensional image and an X-ray image. But you have to pair that with something else. How does he lightly toast his image on here? And one thing they found when they were restoring this, so there was some good that came out of it, minus the vacuuming, they took the patches off and they took a back patch off. We need access to this again to research this. We know nothing about this, but what they saw was interesting. They saw, of course, there's an image on this side. There's an image on this side. There's no image on this side, okay? So somehow he's lightly toasted his image here, but not here. He's lightly toasted his image here, but there's a very lightly toasted image of him right here. Some have suggested the nose is fixed. This is just something we need to look at someday, right? We have no access to it, so we can't see it. But if he's able to pass through this and lightly toast his image, how does he leave his image? Either a blast of light, this is called the coronation theory, and they've done this in Los Alamos. They have reproduced little bits of this. Now, you can't, we don't have enough ultraviolet light power, vacuum light power on the entire planet to reproduce this. Because the problem is the blast of light that you need is about as powerful as if you got within about 10,000 miles of the sun. Are you going to get that close? Not even close. There's going to be nothing left of you, right? What's going to destroy you? Obliterate you. Destroy is not even the right word for it. What's going to destroy you? Yeah, the heat. You'll be far gone, not even close to getting there. So somehow this has to happen miraculously without all the heat power. He just becomes a blast of light. The light power alone could destroy this in less than a fraction of a second, unless it too is miraculous. Do you remember a moment where the Lord became brighter than the sun? He's done this trick. Okay. Do you remember a moment when he passes through something? He's done this trick. It happens right after this. You're thinking really hard about it. Happens right after this. The apostles are scared to death that what happened to him is about to happen to them. They've locked themselves in the room. He has to pass through, it says, right, to visit them. And then he has to eat a little fish to be like, guys, I'm not a ghost, I swear, right? It could be a blast of light. The only other theory that explains this is slow-burning nuclear reaction, not boom, like you might imagine it. But they've been able to do this. It does happen quick, though, where they separate atoms and can pass something through something else. And that slow-burning nuclear reaction, one, would have sucked this down as he passed through it, and two, would have lightly toasted this image on here. They did place, I'm not suggesting you watch it, but National Geographic did a special on the tomb of Christ. And at the very end, in the last 5 minutes, they place a meter right on the slab on which he was buried, and the meter went bonkers, like it would at, a nuclear site or ground zero of a bomb site, something like that. What happened in the tomb? I wish I'd been a fly on the wall to see, or maybe not, because be obliterated, right? But I do think, maybe, just maybe, far before we thought about it, the Lord invented the selfie. Wouldn't that be crazy if Jesus invented the selfie? And you know what I want you to do? People always ask me, and so that's why we'll finish with this. People always ask me, can I take my picture with it? And like they're nervous about it. I'm like, hell yeah, go take your picture with that thing, right? It itself could be the first selfie ever. So anyway, any questions? And then we'll wrap up. Yeah. Food stains. I told you, I always forget. Thanks. I appreciate that. And believe it or not, this is speculation on top of speculation, okay? So don't be telling your friends like, hey, woo, this was that. But there are food stains on this. Again, not from my kids, okay? Ancient food stains right here. even though I roll this out at home, and they're like, they want to roll all over. And I'd like to believe it's because they love Jesus, but I think it's just because it's like the weirdest thing we have in our house, maybe. There's a food stain right here. This is an image, so it cuts some of them off. There's a food stain here and a food stain here. Again, the longer one's in the middle. We have what we believe to be the tablecloth at the Last Supper. There's no food stains on it. Now, if you have money like Joseph of Arimathea, who's helping to bury Jesus' body in his own tomb, and we think could have hosted the Last Supper, probably could have funded the Last Supper, you would have two tablecloths. One would have food stains on it and would go underneath the food. The other one would go over top and wouldn't have any food stains on it. The one we have is a similar size and kind of a similar material. Now, could this be the tablecloth of the Last Supper? This is speculation on top of speculation. But it tells us something wild, right? It just suggests something to us that the Lord at Passover fulfills the Passover, right? It's not about the lamb's body anymore. There may have been a body of lamb. Passover is all about the lamb. The body of the lamb was central to the Passover meal. That lamb gave its life so we could have mercy, right? So we could live. So it's centered around the body of the lamb. We don't have mention of a lamb at Christ's Passover. It's not to say it wasn't there, but certainly the attention is upon whose body? This is my body. He is the Lamb of God. He fulfills Passover in the first Mass ever. Wouldn't that be amazing then? If he's buried in his own tablecloth and his image is left on the tablecloth of the Last Supper. Total speculation on speculation, but kind of fun, right? Any other questions? It's been a real joy to join you. Thanks for letting me take you so late. Please do get a good look at this, and I'll hang out up here in case you do have questions.